Well, it's day 18 and time to look at an alternative approach to validation and form handling using reactive forms. Well, after seeing template forms in action yesterday, it's time to dive into reactive forms. Now, in reactive forms, most of the action is going to happen not so much in the markup here, but in the actual backing code. So first of all, let's get things set up to use a reactive forms approach. We need to change our app module first up to make sure we're importing all the new reactive forms stuff. So if we go into our app module, just like we have our forms module we currently import, we're going to now also import our reactive forms module. And once the reactive forms module is in, we also need to, of course, add it to our imports here. So let's just throw that in there. And so we now have that imported and ready to go. Okay, good. So once that's in, we can now start taking advantage of some of this reactive form stuff. We'll go back to our login component, which we had last time. And we saw that there was a whole bunch of stuff in here around ng model where we created our backing form object, which we could then use various attributes of, such as the dirty check or pristine or invalid or valid or whatever it was. Now we're going to move a lot of that logic out of this tier where we do specific markup like required fields and whatnot, and we're going to now move it into the backing component. So let's first of all, the first change we need to make is this binding to ng form. We're going to change that now so that in fact is replaced with the reactive version, which is form group equals form. So this says for this particular form, I'm going to have a backing object called form, which is going to spell out all of my different constraints on my components and provide the model that will back them. So let's go in and create that form. So in order to do this, we're going to need a couple of imports from our form library. So let's just paste those up the top there. We're going to import form control and form group are the ones we're most interested in initially. So form is actually a form group. And inside that form, we get a whole bunch of components. We had a username, which is new form control, and we had a password, which is also new form control, and of course we had a remember me, which was a new form control. So let's save that. That is our backing form object here. Now this is going to cause a whole bunch of grief because we haven't finished our markup. The next thing we need to do is remove all of these ng model things. So let's just go through here. And we're going to go Control D, D, and delete and space. We'll get rid of those. We're going to get rid of this particular dirty checking operation because that's going to work a little differently in reactive. So we're just going to comment that out for now, but we're going to use it in a sec. And we're going to get rid of this binding as well because and our required field because we can do that in backing code now. Fantastic. So that's step one. We've removed all those. Next thing that we're going to do actually is change how we wire up each of these input controls to that backing object. So for that, we use a different directive. And for that one, we're going to say, instead of it says name equals, we're going to change those to now instead say form control name equals. And this is the bit of magic that says for this input component, when you're sparking this input component, back it with this particular field from our form object. So we have a username, password, and remember me. These guys are going to be backed by this logging component that we have here. So that guy is now set up. We have our form group, we've imported our form controls, and we're ready to try things out. Our app module has an error, so let's fix that up. App module here, and now we're good to go. Now our login form is going to spark up, and it's now got a new backing object. Remember, we still had this stuff we were piping out through JSON, which was our form object, and if we type data into here, the data is here, and password is still here, and our remember me flags are all still working. All of those things are still in place. However, it's using a different mechanism to accomplish that task. Last time we were using actual markup in here and we were binding to those ng models. Now we're in fact generating these controls via a backing component that's setting all of that good gear up. So let's add some validation to our form controls. The two fields that you provide to form control. The first one is the value. So this could be, your username, the default value, and this could be, your password if we want to pre-fill those values. And this is a checkbox, so I can set this to true if I want it to SparkUp has already populated. And the second field that you provide to them is any validators that you want to actually put on these. So in our case, we want to put validators.required on each of these. Validators.required. Fantastic. So those are now required fields. Validators.required. Fantastic. So that's now sparked up and we're good to log in. And we've provided our default values here, which doesn't kind of make sense on a password film, but it does at least give you an idea about how to provide backing components up the front. So once that's done, there's really only one more aspect I wanted to show around this new markup language, and that is how we handle validation errors. So we did this last time, you recall, when we had a look inside our HTML. We had this ngIf field, and we're gonna keep that same approach, but the way we apply it's differently. So you remember last time we actually added a ng model element here to make a local variable that we could then use for dirty checking. Well, now with this reactive extensions, we actually have all of those controls kept in a collection on the form. So we can immediately look at our username.invalid and our username.dirty, and we can flag this particular error message if that's the case. So if we were to run that, for instance, if we had a given value, in fact we have because we've pre-populated this form, if we were to remove it, we then fire this validation error and our username is required field comes up. So that's really the main ways that you can approach this using reactive. Rather than doing it all in markup, we can put all of the logic and source of truth in the backing component, and we can add our custom validators, which we don't have time to cover today, but that is something we can think about down the track. We can put that logic in the backing component. So you'll see that this particular method though is super verbose. This is like massive amounts of source, code here that's not really super duper clear. So the good folk at Angular have provided a little DSL, domain specific language, that makes this much easier to and more intuitive to construct. And it's called the form builder. And you can inject it like any Angular service. And once you've injected it, you can then use it to construct this form. So I'm going to make this public form of type. In fact, I might just leave that one there so you can see what that looks like verbose wise, and then I'm going to set up a public form of type form group. So what we're going to use is we're going to use this builder once we initialize it, and this syntax I think you'll find much more pleasing. So this dot form equals this dot form builder dot group, and then we can supply just the fields that we need. So username colon, and we're going to say, well, the default value is blah for our default value, and we're going to have a validator dot required, and then our password we're going to have also blah, and validators dot required, and then finally our remember me, which is going to be of true, and we're not going to provide any validation for that at all. So this is a different mechanism of sparking up all of this sort of rather verbose construction code, and has exactly the same result. So if we were to remove out a value, validators fire, and so on. So that's really the gist of using reactive code. So in the model template driven approach, we had our source of truth for all of our controls and validation stuff put in the actual markup, whereas in the reactive extensions approach, we have this all done in a backing builder where we can specify all of the validation that we require. But in the end, the same result is when we submit this form, we end up with exactly the same values that we would get in either approach. So either approach is useful, and neither approach is particularly recommended over the other. So it's what works for you. So that's pretty much it for our 2 days of whirlwind of forms and validation. We're going to spend our next session, I think, looking at end-to-end testing, because that's something I've wanted to get into. And now that we have a form we can kind of poke some values into, that'll be even more fun. So can't wait for that. Look forward to seeing you then.